players or even quarterbacks in NFL history. For one, he managed to hang around the NFL for 7 years before voluntarily retiring, when most players are lucky to have a career half that long. Additionally, as underscored by the pitiful 1974 Falcons passing game whose ineptitude Bob Lee and Pat Sullivan were more responsible for than McQuilkin, he was embedded within a terrible offensive infrastructure in which all other men brave enough to try and play quarterback for the Falcons during the mid-70s also struggled immensely. His protection wasn't up to snuff, and he had zero coaching staff stability. What's ironic is that despite his noteworthy struggles during his time in the NFL, in the big picture, very few people have been as successful at as wide a variety of endeavors as Kim McQuilkin has. The man excelled in everything he tried his hand at after his playing days came to a close. First as a football analyst, then in becoming an executive with Cartoon Network, then in starting his own toy company that licensed merchandise for movies, then in presiding over a supply chain consulting business. And whereas plenty of non-stars don't stand out in any way and have boring, forgettable careers, McQuilkin's career lent itself to the creation of some fascinating charts for a documentary made about his Falcons nearly 50 years after he played for them. God, I love Kim McQuilkin.
I do too. This is our official editorial position. Kim McQuilkin rules. Now, all this decidedly subpar quarterbacking cuts even deeper once we consider who was actually presiding over most of it. Between 68 and 74, their head coach was not that far removed from a Hall of Fame career as a quarterback. In fact, many at the time considered him to be the best quarterback ever. Even before being subjected to all this horrendous passing happening right in front of him, this man was already established as one of the crankiest individuals ever to walk the earth. A big old crusty Dutchman who'd cuss you out as soon as look at you. Take just a minute to imagine what such a man might look like. How'd you do? Across all sports, the 1970s were a golden age for crabby red-ass coaches, and Norm Van Brocklin might have been the best of the best. He smoked like a chimney on the sideline. Who's gonna tell him no? This man was a former two-time NFL champion quarterback, spending most of his playing days in Los Angeles, a place he hated because hippies confounded him. In fact, Norm hated everything that was less than 9,000 years old. He hated it when quarterbacks scrambled instead of standing in the pocket. When Lions kicker and Cyprus native Garo Yepremian used a newly introduced soccer-style kick to beat him, he wanted the government to take a hard line against the Cypriots. When the NFL merged with the AFL, his read on the situation was that the NFL was stupid, and also that the AFL was stupid. It couldn't have been easy for a guy who did so much winning as a player to do so much losing as a coach. His first stop was with the Minnesota Vikings, and seeing as they were a brand new franchise, Van Brocklin was able to draft players from other teams. There were a bunch of stiffs, he said, about the players he himself selected. After a few years of losing, he quit, then came back the next day and said he was a fighter, not a quitter, and then he lost some more and then he quit. Strangely, during his time in Atlanta, the press actually seemed to kind of like the guy, despite him calling them whores and sons of bitches, and on one reported occasion grabbing them by the necktie. As an orator, he could stop on a dime and fly off the handle without warning. One of his post-game locker room speeches started with "I'm proud of you boys," and then immediately veered into a rant about how the Atlanta media apparatus was conspiring against him that involved multiple invocations of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. He concluded with a declaration that sounded like something straight out of the Nixon White House tapes. Van Brocklin loved Richard Nixon. He also hated Richard Nixon. What's interesting, though, is that the media didn't simply write him off as an asshole. They described him as a complete enigma, a man they just could not figure out. I think they knew that he was always kinda halfway serious, that he realized he'd never escape criticism no matter what he did, so there was no harm in upping the volume.